The sound tore through my sleep like a knife. Bzzzzzzzt, bzzzzzt, bzzzzzt. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering inside my chest. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. I'm 71 years old, and when you get to my age, those first few seconds after waking can be confusing. The room was dark, the clock on my nightstand, and read 5:07 in the morning, and that sound, that horrible drilling sound, was coming from my own front door. I put on my glasses, I put on my slippers. My knees ached the way they always do in the early morning, that deep grinding ache that no doctor has ever been able to fully explain to me. I shuffled down the hallway of the home I have lived in for 43 years, the home where I raised my children, the home where my beloved wife Patricia took her last breath in the bedroom just down the hall from me, and there, crouched at my front door with a power drill in her hand and a brand new deadbolt lock sitting in an open package on the floor beside her, was my daughter. My daughter, Sandra. She didn't hear me coming. The drill was too loud. She was focused, biting her lower lip the way she always did as a little girl when she was concentrating on something. I stood there in the hallway of my own house and watched my 50-year-old daughter change the lock on my front door at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I felt something I had never felt before in my entire life. Not anger, not confusion. It was something much worse than both of those things. It was the cold, quiet feeling of a man who suddenly understands that something has been planned behind his back, something calculated, something that had been discussed in rooms he was never invited into, something that had been decided about him, without him, as if he were already gone. I cleared my throat. Sandra spun around so fast she nearly dropped the drill. "Dad," she gasped, "you scared me. I didn't think you'd be up yet." "It's my house," I said quietly. "I'm always up in my house." She stood up straight. She was wearing her coat, which meant she hadn't come from home that morning. She had driven here in the dark, before sunrise, hoping to finish before I woke up. Behind her, through the small window beside the door, I could see headlights sitting in my driveway. Someone else was in that car. "Dad," she said, and her voice had already shifted into that tone, the tone I had been hearing more and more often over the past year. Patient, careful, like she was talking to someone who might fall over if she spoke too loudly. "Sit down. I need to talk to you. You're changing my lock?" I said. "Yes," without asking me. "Dad, we've talked about this. We have never talked about this," I said. I would remember a conversation about someone changing the lock on my front door at 5 in the morning. She set the drill down on the floor and crossed her arms. And then she said the words that I will carry inside my chest for the rest of my life, not because they broke me, but because they revealed something I needed to know. "Dad, you're too confused to live alone. It's not safe anymore. We've made a decision. There it was. Let me tell you who I am, because I think you need to understand that before this story goes any further. My name is Harold James Whitfield. I was born in a small house with no central heating to a father who worked double shifts at a paper mill and a mother who made every single dollar stretch until it nearly snapped. I know what it means to have nothing. I know what it means to work. I drove a delivery truck for 11 years before I saved enough money to start my own small moving company. Nothing fancy. Just me and 2 employees and a second-hand truck that broke down more times than I can count. But I worked, Lord, did I work. I worked early mornings and late nights and weekends and holidays. I worked with bad backs and head colds and once, memorably, a broken toe that my doctor told me I should stay off of for 3 weeks. I built that company into something. By the time I retired, we had 22 employees and 7 trucks and a reputation in this town that I was genuinely proud of. I sold the business for a fair price, not a fortune, but enough. More than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. More than enough to leave something behind for my children. Patricia and I had 3 children together. Sandra is the oldest. She was always the sharp one, the ambitious one. She married a man named Douglas, who has a good job in insurance and a habit of always looking slightly bored whenever I speak. They have 2 teenage boys who call me Grandpa and mean it, or at least they used to. My son Michael is 5 years younger than Sandra. He moved to another state 8 years ago for a job opportunity and has called me twice this year. I'm not counting. I'm just saying. And then there is my youngest, my Rebecca, who is 30, 9 years old and lives 3 streets away from me, and who, I realize now, is probably the person sitting in that car in my driveway at 5 in the morning. My Patricia passed away 2 years and 4 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. She fought it for 11 months, and she fought it beautifully, with more grace and humor and love than I have words to describe. When she went, she took a large part of me with her. I won't pretend otherwise. There were months after her passing when I sat in this house and did not speak to another person for days at a time. I'm not proud of that, but grief is not something you schedule. The children worried about me. I understood that. Sandra especially. She started calling every day, which became every other day, which became every few days, which became a weekly check-in that felt increasingly like an inspection. She would walk through my kitchen and note whether the dishes were done. She would check whether I had food in the refrigerator. She would ask me questions that seemed casual but weren't. What did I have for breakfast? Had I paid my electric bill? Did I remember what day it was? I answered her patiently. I always answered patiently, because I am an old man who raised 3 children and built a business from nothing, and I know the difference between concern and control. I had been watching the line between those 2 things get thinner for about 18 months. Looking back, there were signs. About 6 months ago, Sandra and Douglas came for Sunday dinner. They brought the boys, which was nice. But afterward, while the boys were watching television in the living room, I overheard Sandra and Douglas talking in my kitchen. They didn't know I was in the hallway. The house is too big for him. Douglas was saying, "I know," Sandra said. "And the property alone is worth, Douglas. I'm just saying, it's a practical conversation. Not tonight." I walked away. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that Douglas had always been a practical man, and that practical men sometimes said practical things out loud that other people kept private. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. That is something I have done too many times in my life, and I have rarely been rewarded for it. 4 months ago, Sandra brought me to her doctor, not my doctor, her doctor, for what she called a general checkup. The doctor asked me questions about memory and daily functioning. He showed me pictures and asked me to remember them. He asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s. I did it. I did it without hesitating. The doctor told Sandra I was in very good health for my age, with some normal age-related forgetfulness that was entirely expected and not cause for concern. Sandra did not look relieved by this news. She looked frustrated. I noticed that. I filed it away. 2 months ago, my grandson Tyler, Sandra's older boy, 17 years old, said something to me that I have not been able to forget. We were sitting on my back porch, just the 2 of us, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Grandpa, do you know what Mom and Dad are planning?" "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't say anything. "Tyler," I said carefully, "if there is something I need to know about my own life, I would appreciate you telling me." He looked at his hands. "They've been talking about putting you somewhere, a facility. They say they're worried about you being alone." He paused. "But I heard Dad talking to Uncle Michael on the phone last month, and he was talking about the house, about what it would sell for. I sat with that for a long time." "Thank you, son," I said finally. "I thought you should know." He said, "It didn't feel right." Out of the mouths of babes. 17 years old, and he was the only one in my family who had the decency to speak to me like a man. So when I stood there in my hallway at 5 in the morning watching Sandra try to explain herself, I was not entirely unprepared. But knowing something is coming and having it actually arrive in front of you are two very different experiences. We made a decision, she repeated. Myself, Rebecca, and Michael. We're all in agreement, Dad. We love you. This is about your safety. What decision exactly? I asked. My voice was very calm. That calmness surprised her. I could see it. We're going to help you transition to Meadowbrook, she said. It's a very nice place. I've toured it twice. They have a garden, and Meadowbrook is a memory care facility. I said, it's a senior living community with memory care services, Sandra. I said her name quietly. I know what Meadowbrook is. What I don't know is why you are here at 5 in the morning changing my lock instead of having this conversation with me face to face, like adults. She had the decency to look slightly ashamed, just slightly. We knew you'd resist, she said. Of course I would resist. A man should resist when someone tries to remove him from his own home without his knowledge or consent. Dad, the doctor said. The doctor said I was in very good health for my age. He said there was some memory. He said normal age-related forgetfulness, the same thing that affects every single person over 65. I paused. Sandra, I want you to stop what you're doing. I want you to put that lock back in its package, and I want you to come inside and sit down and talk to me. She hesitated. Then she reached for the drill again. I'm sorry, Dad, she said. This is for your own good. And that was the moment. That was the exact moment when I made my decision. I turned around and walked slowly back to my bedroom. I heard Sandra call after me. I heard the front door open and close, and I heard a second set of footsteps come inside. Rebecca, I assumed. I heard the two of them talking in low voices. I went to my nightstand. I opened the drawer. I took out my phone. And I dialed the number I had saved there 3 weeks ago, when Tyler told me what he had heard, because I had been preparing for this. 3 weeks ago, after my conversation with Tyler on the back porch, I called my old friend, Bernard Ackaffer. Bernard and I go back 35 years. He retired from his law practice about 4 years ago, but he still consults, and more importantly, he is the kind of man who, when an old friend calls him and says, Bernard, I need some advice and I need it privately, picks up the phone on the second ring. I told Bernard everything about the conversations I had overheard, about the doctor visit, about what Tyler had told me, about the slow, patient, careful way that my daughter had been managing me for the past year and a half. Bernard listened without interrupting. When I was done, there was a pause. Harold, he said, what is your financial situation currently? Be specific with me. I told him. Another pause. A longer one this time. Harold, he said carefully, what you're describing has a name. It's called undue influence, and in some cases, depending on what they're planning, it can cross a line into elder financial abuse. He paused again. Have you changed your will recently? Has anyone suggested you change it? Sandra brought it up about 8 months ago. I said. She said Patricia's passing might have created some complications, and that I should update my documents. She suggested I use her friend's husband, who is also a lawyer. Bernard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Harold, I want you to come into my office this week, and I want you to not sign anything, change anything, or agree to anything until we talk. Can you do that? Yes, I said. I can do that. I went to Bernard's office. We talked for 4 hours across 2 visits. I brought documents. He reviewed them carefully. He made some calls. He had a colleague review a few things, and at the end of it, Bernard looked at me across his desk and said something I will never forget. Your instincts were right, Harold, and I want you to know that you are not a confused old man. You are one of the sharpest 71-year-olds I have ever spoken with. What's being done to you is... not care. It is management, and there is a very significant difference. So when I walked back to my bedroom that morning, with the sound of my daughter's power drill starting up again at the end of the hallway, I picked up my phone and I called Bernard. He answered on the second ring. "It's happening," I said. "I know." He said, "I've been awake since 4:30. I'm already in the car. Bernard, I'm bringing Detective Reyes with me," he said. We discussed this. "Are you sure?" I looked around my bedroom. Patricia's photograph was on the dresser. She was smiling in it, that wide, open, completely unguarded smile that I fell in love with when I was 23 years old. I thought about what she would say if she were here. I thought about what she had said to me near the end, when we were sitting together, and she knew, and I knew, and neither of us was pretending anymore. "Harold," she had said, "promise me you won't let them take advantage of you. Promise me you'll stand up for yourself. You've spent your whole life standing up for other people. Promise me you'll do it for yourself too." "I'm sure," I told Bernard. I put the phone down. I walked back out to the hallway. Sandra was nearly finished. Rebecca was standing behind her, hugging herself with both arms the way she always did when she was nervous. Rebecca had always been the gentler of the two sisters. She looked at me with eyes that I could tell were conflicted. There was doubt in those eyes. Whatever confidence she had come here with was not as solid as her sister's. "Before you finish," I said to Sandra, "let me make one call." Sandra looked up from the door. "Dad, we're almost done." "I already made it," I said. She stared at me. "Someone is coming." I said, "I think you should wait." It took Bernard 20 minutes to arrive. Those 20 minutes were some of the strangest of my life. Sandra had stopped drilling. She and Rebecca sat in my living room with me, and we barely spoke. Rebecca kept looking at her phone. Sandra kept looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not guilt, not yet. It was more like recalculation. She was a smart woman, my daughter. She was trying to figure out what I had done. "Dad," she said after about 10 minutes of silence, "who did you call?" "Someone who has been looking out for my interests." I said, "What does that mean?" "It means," I said quietly, "that I am not as confused as you seem to think I am." Rebecca made a small sound, almost a sob. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Sandra shot her a warning look. "We're doing this because we love you," Sandra said. "I believe that somewhere inside you, you do love me." I said, "I have never doubted that you love me, Sandra. What I have come to doubt is whether love alone is enough justification for what you're doing." Then the headlights swept across the front window. 2 vehicles. Sandra stood up and looked out. Even from where I was sitting, I could see her face change. One of the vehicles was Bernard's gray sedan. The other was a police cruiser. "Dad," she said, and her voice had gone very strange. "What did you do?" Bernard came through the door first. He is a tall man, 73 years old, with white hair and the kind of steady, measured dignity that only comes from decades of practicing law. Behind him came Detective Reyes, a woman in her 40s who I had met once before and found to be extraordinarily competent. She was not in uniform, but had her credentials on a lanyard around her neck. Rebecca had started crying. Sandra had gone completely white. Bernard looked at them both without expression. Then he looked at me. "Harold," he said gently, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you for coming." He nodded. Then he turned to Sandra and Douglas. Douglas, I realized, had come inside at some point, perhaps when he saw the police arrive, and he said, in his very calm, very precise voice, "I am Bernard Ockoffer, attorney at law, representing Mr. Harold Whitfield. I am here in my professional capacity. M.S. Whitfield, Mr. Thornton. I need to inform you that anything said in this room from this point forward may be relevant to ongoing legal proceedings." The room was absolutely silent. Douglas, who had always had an answer for everything, said nothing. Sandra looked at me. She whispered, "Dad, What did you do? Bernard asked Sandra and Douglas to sit down. Detective Reyes stood near the doorway, observing. Rebecca sat on the couch beside me and took my hand. She was trembling. We have spent the past 3 weeks conducting a thorough review of your father's affairs, Bernard said, at his request, and with his full, lucid cooperation. I want to be clear about the word lucid, because it will become relevant. He opened his briefcase and placed documents on the coffee table. 3 months ago. He said, Sandra Whitfield, Thornton initiated contact with an attorney named Paul Greer on behalf of her father. This contact was made without Mr. Whitfield's knowledge or consent. Mr. Greer was consulted regarding the preparation of a new power of attorney document and the potential modification of Mr. Whitfield's existing will. Sandra said that was just a consultation. It was a consultation that took place without your father's knowledge or involvement. Bernard said, in the context of a pattern of behavior that includes medical appointments arranged without full informed consent from the patient, the attempted installation of a new lock on the patient's home without his consent at 5 a.m, and recorded discussions. He paused here and Sandra went even paler. Yes, recorded discussions between yourself and your husband regarding the potential sale of this property. Douglas stood up. You can't. I can, Bernard said pleasantly, and I have. Mr. Whitfield's home has an existing security system with audio capability, a system he himself installed 4 years ago and which he has been the sole authorized user of since your mother's passing. He had every legal right to record conversations that took place on his property. The silence was absolute. Rebecca was gripping my hand so hard it was almost painful. Sandra's mouth was open. She looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in a very long time. Not at the old man she had decided I was, not at the problem to be managed, at me. Dad, she said, and her voice cracked. We weren't, we were just. You were planning to have me declared incompetent. I said. My voice was still very calm, or close enough to it that you could assume control of my assets and this property. You had a facility picked out. You had a lawyer identified. You were going to do all of it with the 3 of you in agreement and me presented as a fait accompli. I paused. How long have you been planning this? She covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes filled with tears. How long? I asked again, not angry, just needing to know. About a year. She whispered. I sat with that for a moment. A year. While she was calling me every day to check if I had eaten. While she was scheduling doctor's appointments. While she was having Sunday dinners here and helping herself to the kitchen. A year. Did Michael know? I asked. She nodded. Rebecca, beside me, let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a moan. I told them I wasn't sure, she said. I told Sandra something felt wrong, but I let them talk me into coming today. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I put my hand over hers. I know, I said. What Bernard had found in those 3 weeks of careful review was not a comfortable picture. He had discovered that Douglas had been in contact with a real estate agent about this house. Not once, not as a preliminary inquiry 3 times, in detail, including a preliminary appraisal that Douglas had arranged without my knowledge, under the pretense of helping a friend. He had discovered the consultation with Paul Greer, the other attorney, about restructuring my estate documents. He had found emails, printed and documented, in which Sandra had written to Michael describing me as declining rapidly, and not capable of managing his own affairs. Language that directly contradicted what every doctor who had actually treated me had said. Detective Reyes was not there to make an arrest. Not that morning. She was there because Bernard had reported a potential case of elder financial abuse, and she had agreed to make an informal visit, to observe, and to make it clear to the parties involved that what they were planning had been seen, documented, and noted. The legal situation, Bernard explained, was this: no crime had been completed yet. The lock had not been fully installed. No documents had been signed. No assets had been moved. But the attempt, the recording, the communications, the pattern of behavior, created a legal record that would make any future attempt extraordinarily difficult. In other words, they had been stopped, but more importantly, they had been seen. Douglas had the expression of a man who had run every calculation and found that none of them worked in his favor. He was a practical man, Douglas. He understood when a situation had turned against him. He sat very still and said almost nothing. Sandra was different. Sandra had tears running down her face, and she kept looking at me with an expression that I recognized, though it had been a long time since I had seen it. It was the expression she had worn as a little girl, when she had done something she knew was genuinely wrong. Not just against the rules wrong. She had always known the difference, even as a child. I convinced myself we were helping you, she said finally. I convinced myself that you needed us to do this. I know, I said, but it wasn't just about helping you. Her voice broke. Douglas kept talking about the house and the money, and I let that get into my thinking, and I told myself it wasn't, but it was, and Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. After Bernard and Detective Reyes left, after Douglas stepped outside to make a phone call he clearly needed to make in private, after the shock of the morning had begun to settle into the long, exhausted quiet that follows a storm, it was just me and my 2 daughters. Sandra sat across from me. Her mascara was ruined. Her hands were folded in her lap. Rebecca had not stopped apologizing since the moment the detectives arrived, quiet, murmured apologies that I kept receiving with a nod. I thought about Patricia again. I thought about the way she used to handle moments like this with our children, moments of genuine wrongdoing, not just misbehavior, but genuine moral failure. She never shouted. She never used the occasion to catalog every previous offense. She would simply wait until the moment was fully present, and then she would speak. I tried to be worthy of her. I'm not going to talk to you tonight about what this has cost me, I said. Not emotionally, not practically. That conversation will happen, and it will be a difficult one, and we will have it when the time is right. I paused. What I want to say to you right now is this. They were both looking at me. I am your father. I am not your responsibility. I am not your burden. I am not a problem to be solved or a property to be managed. I am the man who held both of you when you were born. I am the man who worked every day of my adult life so that you would have more than I did. I am the man who sat beside your mother while she died and who has gotten up every morning since and continued to live. Because that is what people do, and what your mother asked me to do. Sandra made a sound that was almost inhuman. A grief sound, the kind you make when something breaks open inside you. I am 71 years old, I continued. I will probably need genuine help someday. There may come a time when I cannot live alone safely. When that time comes, I hope that you will be there, and I hope that we will make those decisions together with honesty and love, and with my dignity intact. But that time is not now. I know my name, I know my address, I know my bank account number, and I knew exactly what you were doing this morning before you put that first screw in the door frame. The silence that followed that sentence was very long. Then Sandra slid off the couch and onto the floor in front of me, the way she used to do as a small child, and she put her head on my knee, and she cried in a way I had not heard since she was 7 years old and her first pet had died, and I put my hand on her head, on my daughter's head, and I let her cry. Because she was still my daughter. She had done a terrible thing, and she would have to reckon with that, and the reckoning would not be easy or quick. But she was still mine. That had not changed. Rebecca had her face in her hands. After a moment she looked up and said, "What happens now, Dad, with the lawyer and the detective?" "Bernard will continue to monitor," I said. "The documentation exists. If anything like this is ever attempted again, the consequences will be more serious. I paused. As for our family, that depends on what you choose to do next. I called Michael that afternoon. He knew immediately why I was calling. Sandra must have reached him first, because he answered the phone in the voice of a man who has already been informed that his plan has unraveled. "Dad," he said. "Michael," a long pause. "I want to say something to you," I said, "and I want you to listen without interrupting." "Okay," he said. "I remember when you were born," I said. "You came into the world 2 weeks early, and you were so small that your mother and I were terrified. We took shifts sitting beside your bassinet in the hospital because neither of us could sleep. We just watched you breathe. We were so grateful that you were breathing." His voice, when he spoke, was thick. "Dad, I'm not finished," I said gently. "I remember the year you were 8, and you fell off your bicycle on the hill behind our house, and you broke your arm in 2 places, and you were screaming, and I ran down that hill barefoot. I didn't even stop to put my shoes on, and I held you on the way to the hospital, and you kept saying it was my fault. It was my fault for letting you ride on that hill, and you weren't even being cruel. You were just in pain and 8 years old, and I was the safest person to direct it at." I paused. "I didn't stop loving you then. I am not going to stop now." He was crying. I could hear it. "But I need you to understand the severity of what you participated in," I said. This was not a concerned family having a difficult conversation. This was a plan that was formed and executed behind my back, with the intention of removing me from my home and taking control of what I spent my entire life building. I paused again. "Your mother's house, Michael. The house where she died." He cried for a while. I waited. I don't know how it got there. He finally managed. "It started as being worried, and then Douglas started talking, and Sandra was convinced, and I went along with it, and I shouldn't have. I should have called you. I should have been the one to call you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." "I'm sorry, Dad." A pause. "I'm so sorry." "I know," I said. "I know you are." We talked for another hour. It was the longest conversation Michael and I had shared in years. He told me things about his life he had never told me, about pressures I hadn't known about feeling distant and guilty, about how the distance between us had made it easier to agree to things he knew were wrong because he wasn't here to see my face. I listened to all of it. I didn't offer absolution. It wasn't mine to give. Not in a single phone call. Not without the work that would have to follow. But I listened because that is what fathers do. The weeks after that morning were not easy or simple, and I will not pretend otherwise. There is no version of this story where everything is wrapped up neatly, and everyone is immediately healed. Douglas and I have not yet had the conversation we need to have. I suspect that conversation will require Bernard to be present. Douglas is a man who responds to consequences, and the consequence he is living with right now, the knowledge that his conversations were recorded, that his real estate inquiries were documented, that his role in all of this is clearly established, is one that I believe will shape his behavior going forward more effectively than any words I might say to him. Sandra comes to see me every Sunday now. She doesn't inspect the kitchen anymore. She doesn't ask me leading questions. She comes and she sits and she talks to me, actually talks to me, the way she used to when she was young and opinionated and full of questions about the world, and had decided that I might have some answers. It's imperfect, and sometimes there is an awkwardness between us that never used to be there. But she comes, that matters to me. Rebecca and I have always been close in a quieter way. She told me that she had known something was wrong with the plan from the beginning and had said so, but had ultimately gone along with it because she was afraid of being on the outside of her siblings' circle. That is a deeply human motivation, and I understand it, even as I understand that it is never a sufficient justification. Tyler came to see me alone about 2 weeks after that morning. He sat on the back porch with me and didn't say much for a long time. Finally he said, "I'm glad you were ready for them, Grandpa. I'm glad you told me." I said, "What you did took courage." He was quiet for a moment. I kept thinking, would Grandma Patricia have wanted this? And the answer was obviously no. She would have been so angry. He smiled a little at that. She would have been scary. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep. "Yes," I said. "She would have been absolutely terrifying." We sat with that together, and it was good. There is something I want to say to you directly, whoever you are watching this, because I think it is important. Getting old is not the same as disappearing. When you are young, you cannot imagine being old. When you are middle-aged, you start to see elderly people through a particular lens, a lens of concern, of management, of decisions that need to be made. And sometimes that concern is genuine and necessary and beautiful. Children who care lovingly for their aging parents are doing one of the holiest things a person can do. But there is a line, and the line is dignity. I am still the man I was. My knees hurt. My memory is not what it was at 30. I walk more slowly, and I sleep more lightly, and there are mornings when the grief of losing Patricia comes at me fresh, as if no time has passed at all. But I am here, I am present. I have opinions and preferences, and a sense of humor, and a capacity for love and anger and joy, and all of the things that make a person a person. The moment my children began to treat me as something less than that, as a property, a problem, a matter to be administered, was the moment something went wrong. Not just legally, morally. I do not tell you this story to position myself as a victim. I tell you this story because I know that somewhere out there is someone watching this who recognizes it. Maybe you are an elderly parent who has felt the subtle shift in the way your children speak to you. Maybe you are a middle-aged adult who has been in conversations about an aging parent that you know, in some quiet part of yourself, have crossed a line. Either way, I am speaking to you, to the parent. You are not alone. Your confusion and your grief and your loneliness do not make you incompetent. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Prepare yourself. Speak to someone you trust. You have rights that exist specifically to protect you, and the law is more on your side than you may know. To the children, I am not asking you to abandon your parents. I am asking you to remember who they are. Before they were old, they were young and vital and afraid and determined, and they did things for you that they never once asked to be repaid for. The fact that they now need more of your time and attention is not an inconvenience. It is an invitation. To be present, to be worthy of the love that was given to you before you even knew what love was. The lock. Sandra's new deadbolt is still in its package, sitting on my kitchen counter. I keep it there. I'm not sure why exactly. Maybe because it reminds me of something. Maybe because every time I look at it, I remember that morning, the drill sound, the dark house, the cold feeling in my chest, and I remember that I did not fall apart, that I was not helpless, that I had prepared, and that preparation made all the difference. My front door still has its original lock, the lock that Patricia and I chose together when we replaced the door 20 years ago. She picked the finish, brushed nickel, which she liked because it didn't show fingerprints. I remember standing in the hardware store with her, the two of us debating finishes for a good 15 minutes, and finding the whole thing funny by the end. That lock still works perfectly. I think I'll keep it. Here is what I know to be true at 71 years old, having lived through more than most people and less than some. Love without respect is not love. It is ownership. Silence is not weakness. It is the highest form of preparation. The people who underestimate you are giving you a gift, whether they mean to or not. Your worth does not decrease as your years increase, and perhaps most importantly, it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Never. I am Harold James Whitfield. I built a company with my own hands. I loved a woman for 47 years and held her while she left this world. I raised 3 children who, for all their very human flaws, are still mine and still love me. Even when that love gets tangled up with fear and greed, and the specific kind of selfishness that masquerades as concern. I am 71 years old, I am not confused, and I am still here.